Over the last 20 years, Americans have gotten used to breaking news of gun violence in malls, in schools, at concerts, and even church. But as reports of shootings continue to rise nationwide, in California, reports are trending down. Some say it's a result of swift legal action. Time looks at how California is working to reduce gun violence and asks if the largest state in the nation can serve as a model for the rest of the country.
One of the, I suspect, mechanisms by which California's laws produce their effect is we have a substantially lower prevalence of firearm ownership. There are fewer of those tools in circulation, and no surprise, they get used less, and we have a lower rate of firearm violence.
Gun deaths in the U.S. peaked in the late 80s and early 90s, and California in particular had a huge gun problem. In 1994, the Golden State experienced 17.5 deaths by firearm per 100,000 people, while the national average was 14.7. But this all began to change when California started to place strict restrictions on who could own a gun. From 1993 to 2016, California's firearm mortality decreased by 56% compared to the rest of the country, which saw just a 16% drop.
Most of the country has two ways to buy guns. If you buy from a licensed retailer, there's a background check, there's a waiting period, a record of the sale. But you can buy legally from a private party, and there's nothing more than cash in one direction, gun in the other. Can't do that in California, and that's been true here for more than 30 years. It makes it much more difficult to acquire a firearm anonymously for illegal purposes or for any other purpose.
When conducting a private sale, if both parties are not licensed, the sale has to be facilitated through a licensed dealer. The seller brings the gun to a dealer, and the dealer then delivers the gun to the buyer after a background check and a mandatory waiting period. Another mechanism put in place by California to reduce the prevalence of guns is restricting ownership from all individuals convicted of violent crimes.
California broadened its denial criteria for purchasing a gun to include people who had been convicted of violent misdemeanor crimes. Most other states have not done that. In most of the country, it's simply a myth that you cannot legally buy a gun if you've been convicted of a violent crime. That violent crime has to be a felony. If it's just a misdemeanor and it doesn't involve domestic violence, you can have as many convictions as you want and still buy all the guns that you want. We closed that loophole, and we evaluated that change in policy. What we saw was the group that did not get their guns had a 25% reduction in risk of arrest for a violent crime over the next 3 years. That's a big difference.
Under California law, anyone who wants to purchase a gun must first obtain a firearm safety certificate. The certificate has to be presented to a licensed dealer before a gun can be received. There is a written test to get a certificate, but it's not the same as a license law. When researchers at Johns Hopkins University looked at a large number of policies from all states from the mid-1980s to 2018, they found that requiring a license to purchase firearms was the most significant in terms of not only preventing mass shootings, but other forms of gun violence as well.
When we've studied the specifics of state gun policies, what we find is that you really get the public safety benefits from comprehensive background checks when you couple it with a licensing requirement. That can look a little bit different from state to state, but most fundamentally what it means is if you want to purchase a handgun, you are going to apply directly to a law enforcement or public safety agency who will vet you. Typically, they will do that using your fingerprints to verify your identity. Many of these licensing laws also require some degree of safety training as well. It makes a difference that that entry point is actually a public safety agency as opposed to someone whose job is to sell you guns.
In 2016, California also became one of the first states to enact a red flag law. Red flag laws allow authorities to take away a person's gun temporarily pending due process if they're suspected of being a danger to themselves and others.
Red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders, or in California, gun violence restraining orders. These are all civil mechanisms that allow for an individual who's at high risk of harming themselves or others to be basically disarmed and prevented from purchasing firearms for the duration of the order. And essentially what will happen is someone is concerned that there's a credible threat going on, they'll call law enforcement. And typically law enforcement will serve as the petitioner, so they'll ask the judge to issue one of these orders that will allow them then to remove the firearms from the person and prevent them from purchasing any, for the duration of the order.
After California's red flag law was enacted, a 2016 study showed that it plausibly prevented at least 21 mass shootings. Studies show most mass shooters don't tend to have criminal records, so background checks typically don't work against them. When warning signs are visible, red flag laws offer an extra layer of protection in stopping catastrophic events before they occur.
We know that individuals who are the subject of the order are at much lower risk of killing themselves with a firearm after being issued the order. The evidence with regard to mass shootings is more anecdotal, but I would say also very compelling.
California has a reputation as a testing ground for innovations later adopted by the rest of the country. Could that happen when it comes to reducing gun violence? It's unclear. In Congress, gun legislation has been wrapped up in political polarization, culture wars, and Second Amendment absolutists. In July 2022, however, President Biden signed a bipartisan law that tightens regulation for gun buyers under the age of 21, denies firearms to domestic abusers for 5 years, and provides federal funds for mental health services and state-led crisis intervention programs. Biden says this law will clear the way for more legislative action to take place.
There are about half a dozen other states that have rates of gun violence even lower than California's. We're close to the bottom, but we're not at the bottom. Every one of those other states has gun laws that are as strict as California's. The states with rates higher than ours are rates that don't have the laws that we have. Violence is a very complex health and social problem. There is no easy fix. There's no, to use the metaphor, magic bullet.
What we need and what will be effective for preventing mass shootings and other forms of firearm violence will be a strong network of laws that can work together synergistically to prevent individuals who are at high risk from possessing firearms during periods of crisis.
The one right thing to do is a lot of things at the same time, so that if one intervention doesn't stop a particular sort of case, maybe another one will. To do one thing in a complex system is to simply allow that system to adapt and continue to produce what it's going to produce. We have to do a lot of things at the same time. That's the one thing.